The city from Alistair Vance's 40th floor office was a silent, sprawling circuit board, its lights blinking with a rhythm he had long ago mastered. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass, a silhouette of bespoke tailoring against the encroaching twilight. In his hand, a crystal tumbler held amber liquid he didn't taste. The press release on his desk declared victory. Vance Innovations had secured the preliminary terms for a $50 million merger with a Japanese tech conglomerate, a deal that would cement his legacy. Yet, the triumph felt hollow, another layer of soundproofing in a life already too quiet. The silence was a ghost, a constant companion since the day his world had been fractured by betrayal, leaving behind a man who knew how to build an empire but had forgotten how to build a connection. He loosened his tie, the silk a constricting reminder of the armor he wore daily. Why did this win feel so much like a loss? The question echoed in the cavernous space, a sterile monument to success filled with Italian leather and polished chrome but devoid of warmth. He needed air. Not the filtered, temperature-controlled air of his penthouse, but real, untidy air. He found himself walking, not driving, through streets that seemed alien at ground level. His hand-stitched leather shoes, usually protected by the plush carpets of his car and office, scuffed against the uneven pavement of a public park. It was a place of simple, chaotic life. Children shouted, dogs barked, and an old man played a mournful tune on a saxophone. Alistair felt like a foreigner here, a visitor from another world. He sat on a bench, the cool iron a stark contrast to his heated leather car seat. And then he heard it, a small, clear voice, speaking a language he recognized with a jolt. あなたは一人じゃない。私がそばにいるから。You are not alone, because I am here with you. The Japanese was flawless, the intonation gentle and pure. He looked over and saw a little girl, no older than 7, kneeling in the grass. She was speaking to a scruffy calico cat, her small hand hovering just above its fur. Her hair was a cascade of intricate braids, and her face was a study in serene focus. A few feet away, a man watched her with a look of profound, quiet love. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his hands calloused and capable, resting on a worn book. He wore simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, but he carried himself with an unshakable sense of peace. The man noticed Alistair watching and offered a small, unassuming smile. She finds friends everywhere, he said, his voice a low, warm baritone. Alistair, usually so guarded, found himself responding. Her Japanese is perfect. The man's smile widened. It was her mother's gift to her. One of many, he walked over to his daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up, her large brown eyes meeting Alistair's for a fleeting second before she shyly hid her face in her father's leg. As they turned to leave, the man glanced down at Alistair's shoes. Those look expensive, he noted, not with envy, but with simple observation. But they're not made for walking on uncertain ground. Sometimes, that's the only kind of ground that leads you somewhere new. The words, simple and strangely insightful, struck Alistair with an unexpected force. He watched them walk away, the father and daughter a small, self-contained universe of warmth in the cooling evening. For the first time in years, the silence in Alistair's life wasn't just an absence of noise. It felt like a profound and aching loneliness. He looked from his expensive, scuffed shoes to the empty space where they had stood, and felt the first crack appear in the fortress he had built around his heart. Alistair told himself it was the deal. The pressure of the Japanese merger was immense, and any exposure to the language was beneficial. It was a logical, strategic reason to return to the park the next day, and the day after that. He sat on the same bench, a leather-bound briefcase full of contracts beside him, a stark anomaly in the relaxed, sun-drenched landscape. He felt foolish, a CEO on a stakeout for a feeling he couldn't name. He saw them on the third day. The little girl, whom he now knew was named Maya, was sitting on a checkered blanket with her father, a colorful array of picture books spread around them. Her father, Samuel, was pointing to a page, and Maya was tracing the letters with her finger, her lips moving silently. Alistair's heart gave a strange, unfamiliar lurch. He had no idea how to approach them. His world operated on scheduled meetings and formal introductions, not on the unwritten rules of park benches and shared sunlight. He took a breath, stood, and walked over, his shadow falling over their blanket. Samuel looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment before it softened into recognition. "The man with the walking shoes," he said, a gentle humor in his voice. "Alistair," he supplied, feeling awkward as he extended a hand. Samuel's grip was firm and dry, the calluses on his palm a testament to a life of physical work. "Samuel. And this is Maya." Samuel gestured to his daughter, who had tucked herself behind his arm, peering out at Alistair with wide, curious eyes. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible wave before focusing intently on a picture of a toucan in her book. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Alistair said, the formal words sounding stiff and out of place. "Just our daily expedition," Samuel replied easily. "Today we're exploring the Amazon rainforest. Yesterday it was the Siberian tundra." He tapped the cover of a well-loved atlas. "Maya likes to travel." Alistair looked at the collection of books. They weren't just in English. He saw spines with characters he recognized as Cyrillic, Arabic, and Mandarin. "She's quite the linguist," he commented, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Samuel's pride was a quiet, glowing thing. "She soaks it all up." Her mother was a professor of linguistics. She believed that every language was a different way of seeing the world, a different window into the soul. There was a flicker of old sadness in his eyes, quickly replaced by the warmth of his smile. "Maya has a whole lot of windows." Alistair found himself sitting on the edge of their blanket, his briefcase forgotten on the grass beside him. He didn't talk about quarterly reports or market projections. Instead, he asked about the book Maya was reading. Samuel explained that it was in Portuguese. Maya, emboldened by the safe space her father created, pointed to a word on the page and then looked at Alistair. "Borboleta," Samuel read for her. "It means butterfly." Maya nodded seriously, then pointed to a drawing of a butterfly she had made on a small notepad. It was surprisingly detailed, its wings a kaleidoscope of crayon colors. Alistair felt a genuine smile form on his face, an expression so rare his facial muscles almost protested. "It's beautiful, Maya," he said softly. She didn't speak to him, but she tore the drawing carefully from her notepad and held it out. It was a gift. Alistair took it with a reverence he usually reserved for signed contracts. The waxy paper felt more valuable in that moment than any stock certificate. They sat there for nearly an hour. The conversation flowed with an ease Alistair hadn't experienced in years. Samuel spoke of his work as a furniture maker, of the satisfaction of turning a raw piece of wood into something beautiful and functional. He spoke of Maya's quiet brilliance, of the challenges and profound joys of being her sole parent. He never asked Alistair what he did, what he was worth, or who he knew. He simply accepted his presence, sharing his small patch of sunlight without question. When it was time for them to leave, Samuel stood and brushed the grass from his jeans. "It was good talking with you, Alistair." "You too," Alistair said, meaning it more than he had meant anything in a long time. He watched them pack their books, their movements synchronized and familiar. As they walked away, Maya turned and gave him another tiny wave, this one less hesitant. Alistair returned to his car, the child's drawing held carefully in his hand. Back in his penthouse, he didn't put it in a drawer. He placed it on the polished mahogany of his desk, a small, vibrant splash of color in a world of monochrome achievement. It was a defiant, hopeful little thing, a butterfly in a cage of glass and steel. For the first time, he looked around his silent, opulent home and realized it wasn't a fortress. It was a prison, and a 7-year-old girl had just handed him a key. The butterfly drawing became a silent invitation. A week later, Alistair found himself driving to an address Samuel had given him, located in a neighborhood of modest, well-kept homes and workshops. He had fabricated a reason for the visit, a need for a custom bookshelf for a barren room in his penthouse. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was the only currency of interaction he knew. He found Samuel's workshop tucked behind a small bungalow, the wide garage doors thrown open to the afternoon sun. The air smelled of cedar and varnish, a rich, organic scent that was the antithesis of his own sanitized world. Inside, sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating a landscape of wood. Stacks of lumber leaned against the walls, tools of every shape and size hung in perfect order, and in the center of the room stood a half-finished dining table, its surface smooth as silk beneath Samuel's guiding hand. Samuel looked up from his work, a fine layer of sawdust dusting his arms. He wiped his hands on a rag and smiled, his surprise genuine. "Alistair, I didn't expect to see you here. You mentioned you were a furniture maker," Alistair said, feeling the need to justify his presence. "I'm in need of a bookshelf." Samuel's gaze was knowing but kind. He gestured for Alistair to come in. "Well, you've come to the right place. What did you have in mind?" As Alistair tried to describe the sterile dimensions of his empty room, his words faltered. How could he explain a space designed to be impressive but not inviting? Instead, he found himself looking around the workshop, at the evidence of a life lived with purpose and passion. Family photos were tacked to a corkboard. A beautiful, smiling woman with kind eyes stood with her arm around a younger Samuel. Maya, a toddler in the photo, sat on his shoulders. "Your wife?" Alistair asked gently, nodding toward the picture. Samuel's hands stilled on the piece of wood he was sanding. He picked up the photo, his thumb tracing the woman's face. "That's Elena," he said, his voice soft with memory. "My brilliant Elena. She could walk into a room of strangers and walk out with 10 new friends, all of them talking in a different language." He set the photo down carefully. She was a professor at the university. Linguistics. She argued that language wasn't just about communication, it was about empathy. To learn someone's language is to learn their heart. She'd say. He paused, his eyes distant. She was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. It was fast. One semester she was giving a lecture on Proto-Indo-European roots. The next, she was gone. Alistair stood silently, the manufactured need for a bookshelf dissolving into insignificance. This was real. This was a loss that had reshaped a world. "I was an architect back then," Samuel continued, his voice regaining its steady rhythm, "working for a big firm downtown. Long hours, high stress, chasing deadlines. When Elena passed, I looked at Maya, this tiny little girl with her mother's eyes and her mother's gift for words, and I knew I couldn't give her the life she deserved from behind a drafting table 60 hours a week. She needed me, all of me." He ran his hand over the smooth grain of the tabletop. "So I quit. I had always loved working with wood, something my father taught me. It's honest work. You take something raw, something that's grown from the earth, and you give it a new purpose. You can't lie to wood. It shows every mistake, but it also shows every mark of care. I could be here for Maya. I could make our own hours, build our own life." He looked directly at Alistair, his gaze clear and without a trace of self-pity. "People thought I was crazy, giving up a career like that. They said I was sacrificing my future, but they were wrong. I wasn't sacrificing anything. I was choosing. I chose her." The simple, profound truth of his words hung in the sun-dusted air. Alistair thought of his own life, a series of strategic acquisitions and calculated risks, all designed to build a future that felt emptier with each success. He had chosen ambition. He had chosen victory. He had chosen solitude. Samuel had chosen love. The contrast was a physical blow, leaving Alistair breathless with a sudden, sharp understanding of his own poverty. Alistair, a man who commanded boardrooms with his intellect, found a humbling peace in learning something so tangible. One sweltering afternoon, he arrived to find Samuel on a ladder, struggling to patch a small leak in the workshop's corrugated roof. Without a second thought, Alistair rolled up the sleeves of his $1,000 shirt, took the hammer from Samuel's hand, and climbed up to help. He would leave the sterile quiet of his office and enter the lively, sawdust-scented world of the workshop. One evening, as Samuel was applying the final coat of varnish to the completed bookshelf, Maya tugged on Alistair's sleeve. She led him to her little desk and showed him a notebook. On the page, she had written a single word in careful, block letters. Below it, she had drawn a small, smiling sun. "It's Arabic," Samuel said softly from behind them. "It means, thank you." Alistair felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He looked at Maya, at her earnest, hopeful face, and for the first time, she met his gaze and held it. She didn't speak, but her eyes conveyed everything. Welcome, friendship, trust. He started joining them for dinner sometimes. Simple meals of pasta or stew, eaten at the large, handcrafted table in Samuel's cozy kitchen. He filled the bookshelf not with impressive first editions, but with books on carpentry, astronomy, and world atlases. He even bought a plant for the neglected terrace garden, a single, hopeful ficus tree. He had no idea how to care for it, but the act of buying it felt significant. It was an investment in life, not assets. He was discovering a simple, unfamiliar joy in these moments. The quiet pride in helping Samuel lift a heavy slab of walnut. The sound of Maya's soft humming as she read in a corner of the workshop. The taste of a home-cooked meal shared with people who expected nothing from him. He was letting his guard down, and the world that was rushing in to fill the space wasn't threatening. It was kind. It was warm. It was beginning to feel like hope. One rain-swept evening, the rhythmic drumming on the workshop roof created a cocoon of intimacy. Maya was asleep on a small cot in the corner, tired out from an afternoon of traveling to Egypt via her books. The scent of wet earth and cedar filled the air. Alistair and Samuel sat at a small table, sharing a pot of coffee, the silence between them comfortable and deep. It was Samuel who spoke first. "You're different from when I first saw you in the park," he observed, his voice low. "The man on that bench looked like he was carrying the whole world on his shoulders. Now, you just look like you're carrying your own part of it." The simple, profound observation unlocked something in Alistair. The story he had kept buried for years, the toxic sediment at the bottom of his soul, began to rise to the surface. The man on that bench had just been reminded of what he'd lost, Alistair confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. He stared into his coffee cup, at the dark, swirling liquid, or rather what was stolen from me. He took a deep breath and began to speak, the words coming out in a rush, as if a dam had finally broken. He told Samuel about Marcus Thorne. They had been more than business partners. They had been like brothers, building their first tech company from a garage with little more than a brilliant idea and boundless ambition. Alistair had been the innovator, the mind behind their foundational patent. Marcus was the charismatic salesman. And then there was Clara, Alistair's fiancée, who worked with them. They were a trio poised to take on the world. "I trusted them," Alistair said, the old pain still sharp and raw. "I trusted them completely. The patent was in my name, but the company structure gave Marcus significant control. One day, I came into the office and the locks had been changed. My access codes were denied. Marcus and Clara had colluded behind my back. They used a loophole in our partnership agreement to push me out, taking the patent, the company, everything. They announced their engagement a month later." He finally looked up from his cup, his eyes meeting Samuel's. "It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was the sheer totality of the betrayal. The two people I loved most in the world. They erased me. They built their success on the ruins of my life and my heart. I spent 2 years fighting them in court, nearly bankrupting myself. I won eventually. I got a settlement that allowed me to start over. But I built Vance Innovations on a foundation of mistrust. I vowed never to let anyone get that close again. I built walls of glass and steel and wealth, and I locked myself inside." Samuel listened without interruption, his expression one of profound, unwavering empathy. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply held the space for Alistair's pain, honoring the weight of it. When Alistair finished, the only sound was the rain on the roof. "A wound that deep doesn't just heal," Samuel said at last, his voice a bomb. "It becomes a part of you. The question is whether you let it become a scar that reminds you of your strength or a cage that keeps you from living." In that moment, Alistair felt a sense of release so profound it was almost dizzying. To be seen, truly seen, in his brokenness and without judgment, was a gift beyond measure. He had shared his deepest shame and had been met not with pity, but with understanding. Just then, his phone, which he had set to silent, buzzed insistently on the table. The screen lit up with the name of his COO. A feeling of dread washed over him. He answered, his voice tense. "Alistair, we have a problem." A big 1-inch. The voice on the other end was strained. "There's a rumor campaign starting. Disinformation about our Q3 earnings. False reports of instability in our supply chain. It's targeted and it's hitting the Japanese markets hard. Our contacts for the merger are getting spooked." "Where is it coming from?" Alistair demanded, his posture stiffening, the old CEO persona snapping back into place. There was a pause. "The source seems to be a competitor, a company called Apex Consolidated. Their new senior VP of Global Strategy is spearheading it. A man named Marcus Thorne." The name landed like a stone in the quiet workshop. The past wasn't just a memory anymore. It was here, an active and malevolent threat, reaching out to destroy the future he was just beginning to believe he could have. The cage he thought he was escaping was rattling its bars. The following week was a blur of damage control. Alistair was thrown back into the cold, predatory world he had tried to escape, a world where trust was a liability and every interaction was a strategic maneuver. He was on the phone constantly, his voice sharp and commanding as he directed his legal and PR teams. The warmth he'd found in Samuel's workshop felt a million miles away. Marcus was a ghost from his past, but his tactics were brutally real. He knew exactly where Vance Innovations was most vulnerable. He fed carefully crafted lies to financial journalists, creating a narrative of a company on the brink of collapse. The Japanese investors, known for their cautious and honor-bound approach to business, began to waver. The $50 million deal, once a certainty, was now hanging by a thread. Alistair grew distant. He canceled a planned visit to the workshop, sending only a curt text message. Swamped with work, he missed a dinner he'd promised to attend, the excuse even flimsier. The walls he had started to dismantle were being hastily rebuilt, brick by painful brick. He was retreating into the only role where he felt safe, the wounded executive, the solitary king in his glass tower. Samuel felt the shift immediately. Alistair's absence was a palpable silence in the workshop. Maya would look up from her books whenever a car drove by, her hopeful expression fading into disappointment each time. Samuel didn't push. He understood that Alistair was fighting a battle with demons he knew by name, and he could only hope that the man he'd come to know would win. The final blow from Marcus came in the form of an ultimatum from the Japanese conglomerate, Kaito Corporation. Their CEO, the stern and deeply traditional Mr. Tanaka, would be flying in for an emergency face-to-face meeting. It was a final chance for Alistair to salvage the deal, to personally reassure them of his company's stability and his own integrity. The meeting was set for Friday. Failure was not an option. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about proving that Marcus could not break him again. Alistair threw himself into preparations. He and his team worked around the clock, assembling data, countering Marcus's claims, and preparing a presentation that was nothing short of perfect. He hired the best technical translator in the city, a woman renowned for her ability to navigate the subtle nuances of Japanese business etiquette. Every detail was meticulously planned. He was leaving nothing to chance. The night before the meeting, he stood before the window of his office, staring down at the city lights. He felt the familiar chill of isolation seep back into his bones. He had done it. He had pushed Samuel and Maya away, protecting them from the ugliness of his world, but also cutting himself off from his only source of light. He picked up the small crayon drawing of a butterfly from his desk. Its simple, cheerful colors seemed to mock the cold precision of the financial charts spread out before him. He had to win this fight. Then he told himself he could go back. Then he could try to explain. He just hoped there would still be something to go back to. Friday morning arrived with a cold, steely gray sky. The air in the Vance Innovations boardroom was thick with tension. Alistair stood at the head of the long, polished table, his suit immaculate, his face a mask of calm control. His team was assembled, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and determination. The only thing missing was the translator. His phone rang. It was the translation agency. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry," the coordinator said, her voice frantic. "Ms. Albright has had a sudden family medical emergency. She's on a flight to Chicago. She's unreachable." Alistair's blood ran cold. "Find me someone else," he ordered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." "Sir, we're trying. But no one of her caliber is available on zero notice. The technical specifications, the level of formality required, it's impossible."
Impossible.
The word echoed in his head. After all his planning, all his work, he was going to be undone by a logistical failure. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was Marcus's handiwork. A bribe, a threat, it didn't matter. Marcus had found his weakest link and severed it. The doors to the boardroom opened, and Mr. Tanaka entered with his delegation. They were a formidable group of older men in dark suits, their faces impassive. They bowed formally, and Alistair returned the gesture, his mind racing. He had to proceed. He launched a translation app on the conference room's main screen, a desperate, last-ditch effort. The result was a disaster. The app was clunky, literal. It missed the crucial subtleties of honorifics and formal address. It translated Alistair's passionate defense of his company's integrity into sterile, robotic phrases. He could see the confusion and subtle offense growing on the faces of the Japanese executives. Mr. Tanaka's expression hardened from skepticism to disapproval. The deal was slipping through his fingers. His legacy, his victory over Marcus, his entire company, it was all turning to dust. He felt the walls closing in, the ghost of his first, catastrophic failure whispering in his ear. "You see? You are alone. You will always be alone. And you will always fail." In that moment of crushing despair, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Samuel. "Maya and I are in the lobby. We had a feeling you might need a friend." Alistair stared at the words. Samuel and Maya, here, in his world of sharks and assassins. His first instinct was to protect them, to send them away from this place of conflict and deceit. Bringing them into this room would be an act of madness. It would shatter his corporate image, expose his personal life, and make him look unprofessional and desperate. It was the opposite of everything his carefully constructed persona was meant to be. But then he looked at the stone-faced delegation and the failing translation app. The old way wasn't working. The armor, the fortress, the solitude, it had all led him to this exact moment of failure. Samuel's words from the workshop echoed in his memory. "The question is whether you let it become a scar that reminds you of your strength, or a cage that keeps you from living." He was done with the cage. Alistair took a deep breath, the first truly steadying breath he'd taken all day. He looked directly at Mr. Tanaka, held up a hand to pause the disastrous proceedings, and spoke from the heart. "Mr. Tanaka," he began, waiting for the clumsy app to translate. "What I am about to do is unorthodox. It is not in any business manual. But my integrity has been questioned, and I find I cannot defend it with charts and data alone. I must defend it with the truth of who I am." He walked to the boardroom door and opened it. He gestured for his assistant to bring Samuel and Maya up. A few minutes later, they appeared at the doorway, Samuel looking strong and steady, Maya holding his hand, her eyes wide as she took in the intimidating room. The boardroom fell into a stunned silence. His own team looked at him as if he had lost his mind. The Japanese delegation exchanged confused, disapproving glances. Alistair knelt down to Maya's level, ignoring the dozens of eyes on him. "Maya," he said softly, "I need your help. These men need to understand something important, and my words aren't working. Can you help me?" He saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, but then she looked past him at Mr. Tanaka. She saw not a corporate titan, but an older man who looked tired and worried. She looked at Alistair's face, at the genuine, desperate plea in his eyes. She nodded. Alistair stood and turned back to the delegation. "Mr. Tanaka, gentlemen," he announced, his voice clear and strong. "Please allow me to introduce my translator. This is Maya." The audacity of the act was breathtaking. A child in a $50 million negotiation. But before anyone could object, Maya stepped forward. She bowed deeply and perfectly to Mr. Tanaka. And then she spoke. "はじめまして、田中様。私の名前はマヤです。アリステアさんは、私の大切なお友達です。彼は正直で、とても心が優しい人です。It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Tanaka. My name is Maya. Alistair is my dear friend. He is an honest and very kind-hearted person." Her Japanese was not just fluent. It was imbued with a level of politeness and sincerity that no app could ever replicate. The entire room was frozen in astonishment. Mr. Tanaka's stern facade cracked, his eyes widening in disbelief. Alistair began to speak again, this time not with the jargon of business, but with the simple passion of a creator. He spoke of his vision, of the integrity of his team, of the pride he took in his work. Maya translated, her small, clear voice bridging the vast cultural and linguistic divide. She didn't just swap words. She captured the emotion, the nuance, the very soul of his message. At one point, to explain a complex technical concept about software synergy, she used an analogy Alistair had once used with her father about how different types of wood could be joined to create something stronger than either piece alone. Mr. Tanaka listened. His expression transformed from stony disapproval to rapt attention. One of his younger aides whispered something to him in Japanese, a look of awe on his face. Then something remarkable happened. Maya turned to another member of the delegation, a man who had been quiet throughout the meeting, and said a few words to him in perfect German. The man's jaw dropped. She then looked at another and offered a greeting in Mandarin. She was a prodigy, a miracle standing in the sterile heart of a corporate battleground. She had not only saved the negotiation, she had transformed it. She had replaced suspicion with wonder, and corporate posturing with a moment of profound, shared humanity. The $50 million deal was no longer about numbers on a page. It was about the character of the man who would trust a little girl to speak for his heart. When Alistair finished speaking, a profound silence settled over the room. Mr. Tanaka looked at Maya, then at Samuel, who stood quietly by the door, a pillar of proud support. Finally, his eyes rested on Alistair. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a CEO. He was looking at a man who valued trust and friendship above protocol. A slow smile spread across Mr. Tanaka's face. He stood and bowed, not the stiff, formal bow of before, but a deep, respectful one. "Vance-san," he said, and Maya didn't need to translate the tone. It was a tone of immense respect. He spoke in Japanese, his voice warm. Maya translated for Alistair, her own voice bright with relief. "He says that a man's true worth is not in his balance sheets, but in the family he builds and the loyalty he inspires. He says that a man who would place his future in the hands of a child is a man of incredible honor. He is honored to be your partner." The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a wave of relieved laughter and applause from Alistair's team. The deal was saved. But as Alistair looked past the smiling faces of his colleagues, past the respectful nods of the Japanese delegation, his gaze landed on Samuel and Maya. They were his real victory. The merger, the money, the defeat of Marcus Thorne. It all felt like a distant, unimportant echo. The only thing that mattered was the small, warm circle of light they had created in the cold darkness of his life. After the contracts were signed and the delegation had departed, the boardroom slowly emptied, leaving Alistair alone with Samuel and Maya. The remnants of the battle, coffee cups, printouts, the useless translation app still glowing on the screen, were scattered across the table. Alistair walked over to them, his steps feeling lighter than they had in a decade. He knelt in front of Maya again. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were brilliant. You were everything." For the first time, Maya spoke directly to him in English, her voice as clear and bright as a bell. "You were sad," she said simply. "I wanted to help you not be sad." His heart felt like it might burst. He looked up at Samuel, his eyes conveying a depth of gratitude that words could never touch. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Samuel replied, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. "You just had to choose." And in that moment, Alistair knew his choice hadn't been made in the boardroom. It had been made over weeks in a sun-dusted workshop on a park bench and over simple, shared meals. The climactic decision was merely an affirmation of a truth that had been growing in his heart all along. "I'm done with this," Alistair said, gesturing to the opulent, empty room. "This life, the fighting, the walls. It almost cost me everything twice. It won't get a third chance." He stood and looked at Samuel, his intention clear and unwavering. "I want the life you showed me, the one you build with your own hands, the one where value is measured in trust and love." Samuel's smile was all the answer he needed. It was a promise of a new blueprint, a new foundation upon which they could all build something beautiful and lasting, together. 6 months later, the view from Alistair's penthouse was the same, but the man watching it was transformed. He no longer saw a circuit board of assets to be conquered. He saw a community of lights, each one a home, a story. The sterile chrome and leather of his living space were gone, replaced by the warm, organic textures of handcrafted furniture made of walnut and cherry wood. Each piece a collaboration between him and Samuel. The once barren terrace was now a riot of life. A lush, thriving garden overflowed with tomatoes, lavender, and sunflowers, the result of 3 pairs of hands. 1 pair strong and skilled, 1 pair learning and eager, and 1 pair small and gentle. Alistair had restructured his company. He promoted his most trusted vice president to CEO, taking on a new role for himself as a chairman and chief innovator. His days were no longer consumed by hostile negotiations and market analyses. Instead, he spent his afternoons in the workshop, the scent of sawdust in his hair, learning to read the language of wood. He found a profound satisfaction in the simple, honest act of creation, a joy his multimillion-dollar deals had never provided. He, Samuel, and Maya had become a family, their lives weaving together with a natural, unforced grace. Their evenings were filled with the sound of Maya chattering away, switching effortlessly between Spanish, French, and Russian as she recounted her day at school. They would eat dinner together, sometimes at Samuel's cozy house, sometimes on Alistair's terrace, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. This evening they were tending the garden. Alistair was watering the tomato plants, Samuel was staking the climbing roses, and Maya was carefully weeding around a patch of mint, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Papa," she said, holding up a small green sprig. "In Arabic, this is nana. In Hindi, it's pudina. And in Alistair's language," she paused, a mischievous glint in her eye, "it's return on investment." Samuel laughed, a deep, easy sound that Alistair now knew as the soundtrack of home. Alistair feigned offense, splashing a bit of water in Maya's direction, which sent her into a fit of giggles. He looked at them, this good, kind man and his brilliant, joyful daughter, silhouetted against the sunset. He had spent so many years building an empire of solitude, believing that wealth was a shield. But they had shown him the truth. The most valuable assets in the world weren't traded on any stock exchange. They were the calloused, capable hands of a friend, and the bright, trusting eyes of a child who saw the world not as a battlefield, but as a garden waiting to be tended. This was his real merger,